Right, it's been 525 days since the road safety emergency was declared in Birmingham. The council has a road harm reduction strategy, they have a transport plan, they have the funding. Yet, for this May's 2026 elections, Better Streets for Birmingham has asked every candidate to support a 10-point list of measures, manifesto pledges if you like. This isn't a wish list, it's asking candidates to actually deliver what they have already promised. Today I'm talking with Lucy Caldicott, who's a former Lambeth Stockwell councillor and has delivered road harm reduction measures in her own ward previously and is now Better Streets campaign lead. These two sides should give a unique insight into the Safe Streets advocacy relationship. Lucy, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me today.
Thank you for inviting me.
So, as I say, the council has declared an emergency. It has published road harm reduction strategy. It has committed to Vision Zero. These pledges are largely, they're already council policy, aren't they? So why do we now need to get them to kind of recommit these as manifesto pledges?
I think what we see far too often is that making policies and declaring emergencies and publishing strategies, it's different to actually delivering change on the ground. And what we see in Birmingham is a pace of change that is really very slow. So we see plans being published and then years later still not delivered. So what we did at Better Streets for Birmingham as we move we move closer and closer to the elections in May, is we decided to put together 10 asks. We did it with colleagues in different campaigning organisations, which I think is vital. So we worked with lots of our colleagues in other campaign groups to put together these key asks, which, as you say, are policy. They're not outlandish, brand new things, but they're things which, if taken together and delivered, would make a massive difference to levels of road danger on our streets. And I think the other piece that we did was we tried in the sort of beginning part of the asks, we also tried to paint a picture of what we think better streets in this city could look like. Streets where children are walking to school or cycling to school, streets where you can wait and get a bus that's clean, safe, affordable, and it's going to get you to work on time. Streets where people are driving at safe and responsible speeds. That shouldn't seem like too far away, but it is quite far away from where we are now. So, yeah. Yeah. I mean, it does often seem like that kind of gap between that initial, we're going to implement this, to then seeing that implemented always feels like very long timelines, doesn't it? Yes.
So what, I guess this is what is that gap then between this is a strategy and then actual delivery? What does that look like within a council?
So I've been a councillor, and it's quite interesting because when you become an elected public servant, you are introduced to the enormity of what a council delivers. So adult social care, children's services, I hesitate to say bin collections, and it's a huge business, and so there are a lot of competing priorities. And what we've seen in Birmingham is, of course, what we've seen across the country are councils having their funding, their central government grants reduced, which has had the biggest impact in Birmingham because it is the biggest municipal authority. And so there is a shortage of money, a shortage of capacity, a shortage of people to implement these projects. And often the other piece is that often different departments are responsible for different bits of delivery. So you have a transport department and you have a separate highways department, and both of those big directorates will have a set of activities that they're doing, and it's often the joining of the dots between these different elements is what's hard. So many things can get in the way. And of course, when I was elected in 2018, we didn't know what was around the corner in 2020. The pandemic came along and ripped up all those plans that we might have had. So you have other things that come to sort of trip you up along the way when you're in office, which kind of stop you from delivering what you might have originally planned. So it's really that, I think. It's the complexity, the enormity, the scale of delivery that you have to do, but you need the political will. It's the political will that needs to keep the officers moving forward, and that often can get kind of wrong-footed by events.
I mean, is this uniquely different in Birmingham? Is the disconnect? Does it seem larger than it did in other councils that you've worked with, or is this a common thing? A common theme? I
think it's a common theme, definitely. I think what we've got here in this city is a difference of scale. So Lambeth is an inner city London borough. It's it representing about 330,000 residents, something like that. And in Birmingham, we're talking about a council that's got, you're talking about like well over a million residents. In Lambeth, the number of councillors is 63. In Birmingham, is it 101, 102? So there's this big disparity, which I don't know why, I haven't really got my head around why that is, but what it means on the ground for a councillor, where here in Birmingham you've got 1 or 2 member wards. Across Lambeth we were in 3 member wards. So my number of residents per councillor was much lower in Lambeth than here in Birmingham. Yeah. So it means you're dealing, the just the inbox of a councillor in Birmingham must be much, much bigger than I would have been dealing with. So I think there is, it's the similar themes, like you're always going to have caseload and residents wanting things. But if you've got a much bigger inbox, and also for a department, you're dealing with a much bigger city, right? Birmingham compared to Lambeth, it's a much different scale. So it's interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, it is, as you say, it's those kind of different competing priorities. The scale of deprivation in Birmingham is, and obviously you can imagine that really.
Yeah, because not only have you got to deliver those priorities, you've also got to deliver them in a way that delivers for the whole, diversity of Birmingham, right across this city, and, with all these different communities. And so you've got to deliver change in ways that try to bring people with you as much as you can. And that, that requires a lot of thoughtful work, so it, again, gets in the way of speed.
Yeah, and I guess clarity of the what you say you're going to implement when you're running for election, and then having that as an accountability tool, which I guess is what we're hoping that these manifesto pledges will provide.
Yes, exactly. I mean, that's in a way our role, and it is interesting for me being outside the role I have done in the past and now being in that campaigning role, because it's an important action for community groups like ourselves to take, to express these, asks in ways that hopefully some of the politicians will either adopt or, say yes, but we don't have we have a policy of not adopting, but, yes, we support those, because we're kind of giving them a to-do list. And the more that the public can come along with us and say, actually, yes, that vision of a safer, better, cleaner Birmingham is somewhere where I want to live, the more residents can come along with us for this work, the more that whoever takes office in May, the more they'll have to listen. So that's the role of us. That is, sort of being that accountability measure and helping residents to campaign on their own behalf.
Yeah, I mean, since we've been publishing these manifesto asks, I've seen our membership numbers kind of, or supporter numbers, I should say, really lift up, raise with clearly support many of these things that we're asking for, but they are things that they already are in policy, but it's we're asking them to reiterate on that delivery.
Yeah, and I think often residents, who have got busy lives, getting on with their lives, won't know that these are, they won't, people who aren't like us, in the geekery of policy documents and cabinet minutes, won't know that these are policies. So in a way, what another role of this activity is to kind of help people to understand what actions could be taken by their council and could be implemented to make our streets safer.
Yeah. So some of these, for example, the 20 mile an hour default speed limit, 20 mile an hour rollout, which is in council policy, and it is also in our calls for them to recommit to. We know what an effective policy it is. We know how in Wales it has produced 25% reductions over 18 months with no enforcement, and it's just down to signage on streets. What is stopping each ward just kind of going out and demanding that tomorrow?
So I think partly it would be that residents wouldn't necessarily know that that's the stated policy of the council, so they wouldn't know to ask for it in a way, and I think often, even though the data is clear, there are people who sort of instinctively resist change, or they instinctively resist being told what to do. So there, you can get political pushback where, people, talking about kind of nanny state type, state intervention as being somehow bad, even though this is about saving lives. And I'm old enough, sadly, to have been around when the sort of road seatbelts, I forgot what they were called then. They're so part of everyday life. But campaigns to bring seatbelts in were, that was contested. I mean, they're just extraordinary, and extraordinary to think now. But at the time, it was a big argument about a nanny state. So there'll be these pushbacks, and people instinctively push against something they think is going to inconvenience them, even though an average speed across Birmingham, if you're driving, is going to be probably less than 20. It's not going to be, it's actually not going to inconvenience you. So I think it's this sort of mythology that goes on that means people kind of push against things. And I think another role for us as a campaign group is to help people have more of the facts and understand the background to some of these measures and why. I mean, the difference between 20 and 30 miles an hour in terms of the damage it does to a human body is enormous if you're in a collision. So we need to share those facts and the evidence.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things there. I mean, you kind of alluded to early on in that it's almost for residents to ask the councillors, please implement your policy. That is a kind of funny idea to me, but I guess there are such a whole raft of these policy documents, so it does need that ongoing reminder of that perhaps these are the important ones, and these are the ones you really need to be focusing on.
I mean, I'd hate to say that, I'd hesitate to say that people would write things in manifestos and then not, automatically plan to deliver them. I wouldn't want to be saying that, but it does seem odd that you're having to ask and push a council to deliver what it's already said it was going to deliver. But that's, I suppose, that isn't unique to here, and it isn't unique to this issue. It is a facet of campaigning for change that you can get, maybe get it onto a policy list, but you have to keep on reminding people, keep on pushing. Today, the national government has released a road safety strategy, the first one in a decade. extraordinary. Like, why would you have no road safety strategy? So it is odd that individuals have to campaign for things that keep them safe when the stated purpose of a government is to keep its people safe. But, it is where we are.
Yeah. There was, I'd say that strategy that came out today, I did see in some papers, the reduction in the drink drive limit could, sound the death knell of rural pubs. Which is, as we say, the idea of not wearing a seatbelt now is crazy. Why do we still? I'm old enough to be, to remember when it was perfectly acceptable. It seemed perfectly acceptable for people to have a few drinks and get in the car. Yeah,
and that has become pretty taboo, and so that that is the change that does happen over time. It's the same with smoking. Smoking. Yeah, when I was first at work, you could sit and smoke at your desk in an office. I mean, just extraordinary to think that we've changed. Things have changed so much, but it was contested that cigarettes did damage to you. For so long, and so I think that. And like I say, there are some sections of sort of philosophical thinking that instinctively push against change, and they will instinctively say, they'll equate, a reduction in drink driving will mean, it's kind of, it's sort of playing to a certain gallery, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's that kind of, that's small c conservative, really, which is, what I think many of us are in.
Yeah. Many people are very instinctively against change, in any kind of change. I think that is at our heart. We get a bit worried about change. And so that when you're a councillor and you're campaigning and trying to take people with you, or when you're a campaign group and not necessarily a politician, trying to take people with you, trying to listen to people's anxieties and think about how you might counter those, or adjust what your plans are to take into account people's other experiences or what have you. I think working with people and listening is a very, very important part of all of this.
Yeah. I mean, so we have in Birmingham the Kings Heath low traffic neighbourhood, and the difficulty that they're having in delivering that scheme, and it's really gone for a long time, but much of that is people not necessarily feeling that they have been part of that journey, that this is the council are putting this putting this on the residents. I mean, we do talk about that in our manifesto pledges about cutting down through roads and reduction of traffic in residential areas is an important part of road safety strategy, but how do we get from that being something that's in a policy document, that's in a manifesto pledge, to how does the council then deliver that?
Well, I think what we're up against is if we continue with the status quo. I mean, was it yesterday we were told to be very excited about how many new cars have been sold in the last 12 months or something. So the number of cars is going up steadily, and the number of roads isn't going up steadily in the city. So we are starting to get to a point, there will be a tipping point where there will be gridlock if we carry on, because you can't just carry on having more and more cars. You've got to find a way to somehow reduce. And the issue has been over the last sort of 10 or 15 years that the use of Google Maps and Waze has basically kind of encouraged people, and no fault of their own, and I use it too, and I'm not, this is about all of us, but people go, are sort of encouraged to take shortcuts through residential roads and shave a few seconds off their journey. So I think that, the low traffic neighbourhood idea is, in isolation, is difficult to argue for unless you see the bigger picture. Because what you've got to try to do is explain how we're trying to cut those through journeys, keep cars on the main arterial routes, and overall try to reduce the number of journeys taken by car. And it's a very complicated argument and complicated conversation to have on social media. And I was involved in Lambeth in implementing a low traffic neighbourhood in my ward. It was Stockwell Ward and Oval Ward, which are neighbouring wards along the A3 coming next to Oval, the cricket ground. And we were we cut through traffic along a series of roads down that A3, because you couldn't just cut one, because then you just put the traffic onto the next one. So you just move the cut through. So we basically had to cut all of them. And in order to sort of have the conversations with residents, I can't tell you how many conversations I had with like endless conversations with residents, endless walking around with them where they told me what their concerns were. I had people who were worried, people who worked in a hospital locally who were worried that their journeys would be delayed. I had people with blue badge holders who were worried about their carers coming. I had mums who had, school runs to do on their way to work. So we listened to all of that feedback and genuinely made changes. So for blue badge holders, you got an exemption, and so there were changes you can make. So so I suppose what I'm trying to articulate, probably quite long-windedly, is that a low traffic neighbourhood should be seen as part of a bigger picture. In Lambeth, it was a bigger plan. It was across the whole borough, and it was part of the London plan. It wasn't just one ward, one place, because if you do it in one place, then you will risk putting traffic elsewhere. But what we found was that we had the LTN in Stockwell Oval. Then I had residents on the neighbouring, and they wanted it as well. So you then get this kind of desire, because actually it's really good. It's really good because the traffic stays on the bigger roads, and over time people do take fewer journeys, and over time it works. And I could show you the one in Lambeth. There's some great pictures of much quieter streets now. So, but you do have to have the conversations with residents. You do have to listen, and you do have to be ready to make adjustments where they recommend things that are different.
I mean, that really sounds like, again, that importance of being able to have fewer or be working in an environment where there are fewer residents to each councillor, so you're able to have that engagement. Whereas if you've got so many residents,
yes, exactly, and I do think that is a difficult dimension here in Birmingham. And I think the other thing that I was I look back and was quite fortunate was that at the time we were doing this, it was at the moment of the pandemic when you were allowed to meet outside maximum of 6 people. So not only did I have fewer residents, I also could only meet in groups of 6. So I did I remember doing a series of walkarounds, and there was a particular estate, and this is an interesting example of what you can be told by an officer in the council, and then when you go and have a look yourself, you realise that it's different. So there's an estate in that ward that is owned by Lambeth, so it's a council estate, and there's a road through it, which is a private road because it's on a wholly owned land by Lambeth. So I was being told by the Transport Department or the Highways Department, oh, that's a private road. Google won't send trucks down there. That's not going to be a traffic jam. And then I went and had to look at it with residents, and they said, no. Everybody uses this as a cut through already. This is already a problem. And so we looked at how could we cut that, could we gate that road, or what could we do? So we found some solutions for that. But it's really interesting. Unless I'd done that, unless those residents had told me, we'd have had juggernauts probably going through like a council estate where children play. So you have to do that work. You have to get out there and be prepared. I had people shouting at me. I had people really upset. But I think the other thing I want to say, because I don't want to sort of paint this picture of, Birmingham should do this and Birmingham should do that. We've got to remember that in Lambeth or in London, only a third of people have access to a private car for their own personal use. Whereas here, it's more like 2/3.
Yeah.
So we are talking about a very, very different context.
Though, I mean, most journeys here are sort of under a quarter of a mile or something like that, I think it was. So.
Yes, I think that is another thing to think about, that, in London, of course, you've got much different public transport availability as well. So let's not forget that as another dimension.
Yeah. So a quarter of car trips are under a mile in Birmingham.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean,
that is a very interesting statistic, which I find it interesting. I mean, I have been used to, because in London, if you have a car, you can't necessarily park it outside your house because parking is pretty congested. And if you do move it, you lose your parking space. So then you start thinking, oh, well, I'm not going to use it to go to Sainsbury's because Sainsbury's is only 15 minutes walk away. So I'm going to walk to Sainsbury's. So me and my partner, Claire, we would walk up and down, rucksacks full of shopping. And we just got used to that, even though we owned a car. And so then we've come here and we see everybody going to the supermarket in their cars. And of course, but we've carried on with our rucksacks. Yeah. And so it is interesting. And I sort of think there's an interesting sort of way of thinking about this, that if everybody who does, say you do 10 car journeys a week, if everybody said, well, I'm going to do one less, I'm going to do 9, instantly you'd have 10% less cars. You'd absolutely transform things in a heartbeat. And so what I will always say to people is, this is about all of us. This is not about pitting one person against another person. I've got a car, I drive around in a car. It's just like, I'm not going to shame people. This is about all of us trying to work towards a different way of living in our city and working together to make that happen.
Yeah. We have in my ward in Harborne, we have had a parking permit scheme, has been on the books for years now, as long as I remember going to ward forums, and it's still struggling to be delivered. And I've seen different teams of highways engineers come in, take ownership of the project, do consultations, kind of behind. I mean, it's, to kind of bring it back to the manifesto pledges, does having that clarity of statement of this is what we're going to be implementing. I mean, does that, because this must have morale problems on these teams who are struggling to deliver these issues.
Oh, it must be so tough, I think. Because you need the political kind of backup. You need the sort of all of it working together. So you need the public campaigning side, the politicians, having the back of the officers who are tasked with delivering those things. And it's hard for the officers if it's all put on them. So all of that kind of needs to work together. But again, I remember all of this in London, 20, 25 years ago. I remember congestion charge coming in. I remember red routes coming in. I remember congestion, controlled parking zones coming in. So paid for residents parking. All of that coming in. All of that was contested. There were arguments against all of it. And it is now there. It's all there, So, and gradually, what happened with controlled parking was that you'd have one little cluster of streets, maybe in Harborne, like round like the main shopping area, and then the neighbouring streets would get congested. So they want it as well. So then gradually, it kind of moves out and. The council's got a revenue stream, which, per household is not much, it was like not a big fee per household, but it's kind of acknowledging that roads are not free, that people go, oh, I need to be able to park outside my house. Well, you don't own the road outside your house.
No, and
it's public land and it has to be maintained by the public purse. So,
of course. If we say the car ownership is 2/3 of the population, that means another third or quarter, whatever it is. They're also still paying for that upkeep. Yeah. Even if they're they're kind of subsidising that. Okay, So the worry here then is that people are going to commit themselves, they're going to offer manifesto commitments, and then they don't follow through. Or, I mean, I suppose flip side is that they don't want to say it publicly at all, but they still believe. I mean, how do we kind of get people to commit to something and to stick to it?
So I think we continue our work. So we continue pushing, we continue encouraging residents to make these calls. So imminently we'll see who the candidates are across all of the wards for all of the parties and no parties. And I would encourage people who support Better Streets for Birmingham's aims and want to see the sort of result of the asks that we've got in the manifesto. If you want to see that implemented, then when you see your candidates, and ask them, email them, ring them up. If they come to your door, ask them what they're going to do, and like get these issues up on the agenda, so that whoever takes control, we don't know, there may be a change of administration, but whoever's in power, they know very loudly what the residents of this city want. So if this is what you want, if listeners to this podcast, want this, then ask the candidates. And then once they're in office, you can hold them to account, and we will be holding them to account because that's our job as campaigners. But, the residents will have, whatever the commitments are that are made, they will be able to hold them to account. So that's democracy. So
yeah.
And the opposition will also have a strong, whoever's the opposition following May will also have a strong idea of, so they'll be holding the administration to account as well. So
yeah. I know. So I mean, that's very much our job, is to keep reminding that this isn't just a temporary thing. This is an ongoing issue. And
we're not going away.
No.
We're not going away, and I'm you and I and all of us are committed to this work. So and I think that the job of us is to do our campaigning work and raise awareness of these issues, but also to give members of the public the tools and the facts so that they can do whatever campaigning that they feel able to do as well, if it matters to them. So
right. Thanks. Okay, well, thank you very much, Lucy, for taking time to talk through this with me.
You're very welcome. It's been great. So
yeah, it really has. It's been really great to listen to someone who has experience on implementing this and has experience in engaging with residents as a counsellor as well as an advocate. If you, the listener, would like to know more about our manifesto asks, you can find them on our website, which is betterstreetsforbirmingham.org, and you'll also be able to sign up there as a supporter, which is free to do and helps add your voice to this chorus asking for change. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you again next time.